Human beings have asked the same question for thousands of years. What happens to consciousness after death? Ancient India was no different. Philosophers, seekers, and spiritual teachers constantly debated this question, and many people asked the Buddha directly. But here we encounter something very important. The Buddha did not give a detailed explanation of the state of consciousness after death. People asked him questions like, does the awakened one exist after death? Does he cease to exist? Does he both exist and not exist? Or is his state beyond all such descriptions? These were traditional philosophical ways of examining existence in ancient India. People were trying to categorize every possible state of being. But the Buddha refused to answer. And he explained why. Because, he said, these questions do not lead to the end of suffering. This is extremely important. He was not remaining silent because he lacked knowledge. He was choosing not to engage with questions that did not help liberate the mind. As a result, early Buddhist teachings contain almost no detailed descriptions of the afterlife. There is no systematic explanation of where consciousness travels, what worlds are experienced, how long one remains there, or what entities are encountered after death. And yet many people misunderstand this point. Did the Buddha therefore believe that everything simply ends at death? Not exactly. He repeatedly spoke about rebirth. He said, craving leads to renewed existence. And also, where conditions exist, becoming arises. In other words, he taught continuity, but not the migration of an eternal soul. He never described consciousness as a permanent self floating from one body to another. Instead, he used a famous analogy. One candle lights another candle. Is the second flame the same flame? Not exactly. But it is not completely different either. This, he said, is how existence continues. This idea is extremely subtle. There is continuity, but not a fixed self moving through time. What continues is not a soul, but a process. The Buddha described consciousness itself as conditional. Consciousness does not exist independently. It arises when causes and conditions come together. So the real Buddhist question is not, what happens to consciousness after death? The deeper question is, do the conditions that generate suffering and continued existence still remain? And what are those conditions? Craving, attachment, ignorance, habitual patterns of mind. These become the fuel for repeated becoming. The Buddha even described it symbolically. Karma is the field. Consciousness is the seed. Craving is the moisture. When these conditions are present, existence continues. From this perspective, rebirth is not the travel of a soul. It is the continuation of conditions. But what happens when those conditions completely end? Here, the teaching changes dramatically. The Buddha says, when craving completely ceases, rebirth also ceases. And this is why he avoided speculative metaphysics. He gave another famous example. A man is struck by a poisoned arrow. But before allowing anyone to remove it, he insists on knowing who shot the arrow. What wood was the bow made from? What kind of feather was attached? The Buddha says, that man would die before receiving treatment. In the same way, obsessing over metaphysical questions without understanding suffering itself keeps the mind trapped. So Buddhism turns attention away from speculation and toward direct observation of experience. Notice the body. Notice sensation. Notice thought. Notice craving as it appears. Because suffering is not merely philosophical. It is structural. It is psychological. It is repetitive. And according to the Buddha, freedom begins when this entire mechanism is clearly seen.